Well, do you want to ask me questions about the forward, or shall I ask you folks? That's a fair offer, isn't it? This way, somebody will get to learn something. Let's just go right down the line starting on page 2, and of course we can spend 2 weeks on page 2. But what bugs you?
All right. The universe of universes presents phenomena of deity activities on diverse levels of cosmic realities. Explain that.
Where are you reading?
The second line under deity and divinity. Then it follows divine meanings and spirit values, but all of the demonstrations, perfect or otherwise, are divine and coordinated.
Diverse levels of cosmic realities. Cosmic refers to the physical universe there, I think, because it stands in contrast to mind meanings and spirit values. In other words, we observe deity to be active on various levels of a material, mindal, and spiritual nature. And all of these activities are divinely coordinated, because as we read on the next page, divinity is the characteristic unifying and coordinating quality of deity. If something is an act of deity, direct, indirect, perfect, relative, or even imperfect, it shows cohesive properties. It's drawn together as iron filings are drawn to a magnet. It makes certain patterns, just like if you put a magnet under a sheet of paper and shimmy iron filings on top. It forms those beautiful patterns indicative of the magnetic field of a horseshoe magnet. And this is how total deity is working. Not partial deity, but total deity. Of course, now when you get down into the level of the supreme and the ultimate, you've not only got evolutionary deity, experiential deity, but you've got the Paradise Trinity functioning there. You have God functioning there. You have the Son and Spirit functioning there. You have God the Sevenfold functioning there. See, there are 3 levels of, I think of the first, second, and third level as the base which deity establishes. Then you have 2 centrifugal levels and 2 centripetal levels. The 4th and 5th level, creative and evolutional, are centrifugal, outgoing. The 6th and 7th are centripetal, in-gathering. The supreme level is the first creature identificational level. The ultimate level, flip over to the next, is the second level of unifying divinity expression. The absolute level, over on page 4, is the third level of unifying deity expression and expansion. That's the final level.
I said that right down here at the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
On page 2, I mean.
Yeah, this third level of unifying deity expression. I think of the static level as before pre-zero. I think of the potential level as pre-zero, and you get some associativeness in there. I think the zero age sees the beginning of the associative function of deity. But I don't think the associative function is completed until the first universe age, at the dawn of which you have the Trinity, which is the first real association of deity, or unification of deity.
You have Havana?
Yes, you sure do. Havana, practically considered, is a creative expression of deity. Except, of course, it has no origin, so it's a little hard to apply the word creative. But we have to think of Havana as a creation. I don't think you get the evolutional function until the second universe age. That's the one we're living in now. I see no evolution in Havana until the second age. First age Havana is non-evolutionary, or a better term would be pre-evolutionary.
I'd like for you to talk a little bit about creative.
Well, an act of creation simply takes something out of the realm of a potential and makes an actual out of it.
But what was? This happened, are you talking now on creative, you can be talking about the creation that occurred in Havana.
Yes, except Havana never was created.
No, I mean after
Yes.
Havana was created,
Yes.
I mean...
Well, take for example, secondary Supernifim. There were no secondary Supernifim in Havana in the first universe age. Secondary Supernifim were not created in Havana until the Havana Pilgrims and the Paradise Pilgrims entered Havana.
Well, now you're talking about a transitional zone then between creative and evolution.
No, a secondary Supernifim didn't evolve. A secondary Supernifim was created, bang, just like that by one of the seven master spirits.
But the seven master spirits were created. I mean, they were in the creation.
They were eternal.
No, the seven master spirits are post-eternal.
That's right.
Let me clear this up a little bit. Let me get the baby
Will you
out.
give us,
I'll give
Oh,
you
no, please, you know what I'm asking. I think I'm asking it right.
let me clear up this
at the
transition.
close of a zero age, will you give us a personal inventory?
Just a second. At the close of the zero age? Yeah, let me do this.
Inventory of all personality.
This is the
Close of zero.
4. No, I can't.
Bert can.
Let me get you
What's
a...
that temperature on? Bill, is that what's the water in here? Damn, you ought to come out here.
Did it see windows up there, Bill?
I ain't so warm. But if everybody else is comfortable, I'm real fine, KB.
I'll see what you. I'll give it 1 degree.
Let me read you this from this appendix here. This is from Appendix 4, Section 5A. The transitional times between Havana and the super-universes. Is this what you want?
Right. At the close of zero, isn't it?
No, it's the close of the first age. At the close of the zero age, it's real simple. You have the Father, the Son, and Paradise.
At the close of zero age,
Yeah.
an inventory of all personalities includes
The Father and the Son, that's all.
just not in physical
And Paradise.
And
inventory.
Paradise.
Paradise.
And the absolutes. This is pre-Havana, pre-space, pre-infinite spirit. Of course, the big question is, do you or do you not have transcendentalers?
This
Bill,
is
give it to
now-
him at the dawn of the first universe age. I think that's what he's going to... You don't want
I
that?
don't want to go that far yet,
Okay.
Bert. I
Okay.
want just what Bill is saying. At the close
Of the zero age,
of the zero age,
in actuality now, not potentiality.
oh no, but in actuality.
You've got God, the Son, and Paradise. And an open question about transcendentalers. Because if they contributed to the planning for Havana, they had to be there then.
And the three absolutes.
Well, that's not actual. This is an inventory of actuality. Three absolute
Inventory of
potentiality.
actual physical beings, there's one perfect machine, and two personalities.
That's correct.
At the close of the zero age.
Right.
You aren't going to include the The absolute.
Yes, but they're
Oh.
potentials. This is an
Oh, I see
inventory
what
of
you mean.
actualized
Mhm.
reality.
I see what you mean. Okay.
Now,
And you get the same thing at the close of the sixth universe age in terms of experiential reality. You have two experiential deities and a power nucleus, the master universe. History repeats itself.
now, is it too cumbersome and are they too numerous for you to inventory the personalities and the physical things at the close of the first universe?
That's what I'm going to read you.
Thank you.
I won't give you complete inventory, but I'll give you what you want. A, the unqualified concept of the first age. Do you want the references on this? I guess it's studded. Or would it be a nuisance? I'll just read it. The third person eternalized simultaneously with Havona. Since the conjoint actor is eternal, so also is the central universe. Like Havona, the Havona natives never were created. Now let's go back here. I think I know where there's a better thing of what you want. All right, let me read you this. Here's an inventory of the first universe age. We're instructed that the innermost core of the master universe, the central and divine universe, is eternal. This pattern creation of divine perfection is coexistent with the infinite spirit, the third person of deity. It appears by the will of the Father, Son, through the agency of the God of action, the infinite spirit, the conjoint creator, who eternalizes simultaneously with the appearance of this central creation. We speak of Havona in the first universe age, but just what do we mean by this concept? It is quite different from the description of Havona in the present universe age, the second age. Let us examine this concept, first from the standpoint of the physical aspects of Havona, and second, from the standpoint of the personality activities taking place in Havona. The physical aspects of Havona. The best description of the central universe is given in the papers on page 152, paragraphs 3 to 11. Here we have a picture of Havona that essentially breaks down into three units. A, the three circuits of paradise satellites. These are the three innermost circuits of 7 worlds each, the worlds of the Father, the worlds of the Son, and the worlds of the Spirit. Page 143, paragraph 1. We are informed that each of these three groups of 7 worlds is differently eternalized. Page 143, paragraph 2. This must mean that they have different origins in eternity. This seems paradoxical, but we will explore something like this concept in the very next section of this appendix. The material or the physical construction of these spheres is not like anything else in creation. The 7 worlds of the sun are alike in physical nature, but the other 14 worlds are each different. This means that there are 15 different orders of materialization that are completely unknown to us. They're not triada, they're not absolutum, they're not gravita. B, the 7 circuits of Havona world. When we normally think of the central creation, we are thinking about the 7 planetary circuits of Havona, in whose space paths the billion perfect spheres of the central creation circle the Isle of Paradise. Page 152, paragraph 11. All of these worlds are constructed out of an energy materialization called triada. Page 156, paragraph 4, page 470, paragraph 7. This is physical matter, but it is not the kind of physical matter that we know, the kind of matter out of which the time-space universes are constructed. B. Should be C. The 2 circuits of dark gravity bodies. These unique space bodies are at the periphery of the central creation. These two circuits are so large that they hide Havona even from nearby outlying universes. Page 153, paragraph 6 and 8, page 154, paragraph 1 and 3. These dark space bodies are so massive that the total mass of the central creation is actually greater than the mass of the 7 superuniverses. Page 129, paragraph 9. Their physical construction and even their physical properties are not like any other kind of energy materialization that is found anywhere else. Page 126, paragraph 3. This is the physical picture of the central universe in the first age. So far as we are informed, except for the later stationing of power centers on the pilot worlds of the Havona circuits, page 321, paragraph 4, and the integration of its power supervision with the superuniverses, there has been no change in the central creation from the physical standpoint. But from the standpoint of personalities and personality activities, there has been much change. Is this what you want, Clyde?
Right.
Personality activities in Havona. Havona in the first...
That's still in the first age.
Yeah. Havona in the first age must have been a purely existential universe. It could have contained nothing of an experiential nature. As nearly as we can determine, the seven master spirits were the first personalizations of experiential deity. Page 110, paragraph 6. And these beings and all creation subsequent to them could not therefore have been present in Havona during the first universe age. There are no seven master spirits. Let us now consider just what eternal Havona was like in the first age. A, the worlds of the Father. The seven worlds of the Father were in existence and were being administered with the Trinitized secrets of supremacy. Page 208, paragraph 6. But the activities of these worlds must have been very different in the first age. Most of what we are told about them pertains to the affairs of the second age. Consider Ascendington in the first age. What was happening on this sphere when there were no ascenders? Page 147, paragraph 3 to 5. There were no solitary messengers. Neither were there power directors. Solitary messengers. There were no solitary messengers in existence. Page 256, paragraph 3 and 4. To be domiciled, neither were there any power directors. Page 319, paragraph 10. To be domiciled on Solitarington. Page 146, paragraph 6. None of the descending or ascending sons of God mentioned in the papers were in existence, because all of them must post-date the infinite spirit. Therefore, none of these beings could have been domiciled on Sonarington. Page 145, paragraph 2. The sphere Divinington was undoubtedly the home world of the Father fragments. Page 144, paragraph 5 and 6. But no thought adjuster had yet gone forth to indwell a human being. There were no human beings. Father-world relationships change with the passing universe ages. Page 148, paragraph 5. In the first age, they were different from what we've been told about them in the second age. In the third age, they will undoubtedly change once more. B, the worlds of the sun. We're told very little about the seven worlds of the sun, merely that personalities do not visit these home worlds of the otherwise impersonal beings originating in the eternal sun. Page 149, section 3. So far as we know, there has been no change in the function of these worlds when the first age is compared with the second. There may have been, there may not have been. C, the worlds of the spirit. On these spheres, there has been a radical change when the affairs of the first age are compared with those of the second. These are now the executive abodes of the seven master spirits. Page 150, paragraphs 2 to 6. Each of these seven spheres is the administrative clearinghouse for one of the seven superuniverses, and is presided over by one of the seven supreme executives. Page 198, section 1. But in the first age, there were no master spirits. Neither were there any supreme executives, because these beings were later trinitized according to the specifications of the master spirits. Page 198, paragraph 1. What was the function of the seven worlds of the spirit in the first age? We ask this question, but the papers are silent on this point. D, the seven Havona circuits. In the first age, the billion eternal worlds of Havona were fully functional with their eternal natives. Page 157, paragraphs 2 and 3. Page 221, paragraph 4 and 5.
Bill, what did you just read these? I lost that.
In the first age, the billion eternal worlds of Havona were fully functional with their eternal natives, the Havona natives.
The Havona natives.
And each of these billion worlds was under the perpetual rule of an eternal of days. Page 208, paragraph 6. But we doubt that there was any evolutionary progression on the part of the Havona natives. Page 157, paragraph 6 to 9. Page 221, paragraph 6. It seems probable that evolutionary progression did not appear as a feature of Havonan life until the Second Age. The 7 circuits of Havona were in existence, but the circuit spirits were not. Page 287, paragraph 5. Neither were there any power centers on the pilot worlds of the 7 circuits. Page 321, paragraph 4. There was no progression of ascenders or descenders in Havona, because this two-way progression was initiated by an event that occurred in the Second Age, the arrival of Grand Fanda. Page 270, paragraphs 3 to 6, page 291, paragraph 1. And of course, many personalities now functioning in Havona were absent in the First Age. Among these are included the graduate guides, the Havona Servitals, secondary Supernafim, and tertiary Supernafim. In fact, just about every type of being that we know about, except the Eternals of Days and Havona natives, would have been missing from the 7 circuits of Havona in the First Age. The central universe in the First Age was completely lacking in everything and everyone that has been introduced as a result of its becoming a nuclear creation in relation to the 7 superuniverses. In the First Age, Havona had no external relationships, only relationships within itself and internal relationships with Paradise. The Isle of Paradise. In the First Universe Age, the Isle of Paradise was present, together with its numerous orders of citizens, including the transcendental super-citizens of the Eternal Isle. And of course, the architects of the Master Universe were present on Paradise, for they are the governors of the Transcendentalers. The 3 persons of deity, the Universal Father, the Eternal Son, and the Infinite Spirit, are all present in the First Universe Age. The Paradise Trinity was in existence. It comes into being with the personalization of the Infinite Spirit, and this means that the Trinity is coexistent with the Central Universe. The 3 absolutes of potentiality were also present, the universal, deity, and unqualified absolutes. All of these realities are eternal, unqualifiedly eternal. The Paradise Trinity, the Paradise deities, the 3 absolutes, the Paradise Isle, and Havona. All of these beings, entities, and materializations are without order. A summary or inventory of these eternal existences might read something like the following. A. The 7 absolutes of infinity. First, second, and third sources and centers, the Isle of Paradise, deity, universal, and unqualified absolutes. B. The Paradise Trinity, undivided existential deity. C. The central and divine universe, Havona, and its eternal inhabitants. E. The inhabitants of Paradise, Paradise citizens and transcendentalists. This summary is the inventory of the original and existential and eternal core of reality. If we were to attempt to go back of this, we would be departing from factual reality. And then we start on back. There's your inventory claim.
You didn't mention Trinitarian secrets of supremacy.
Yes, it is.
I
So they were in charge of the Father's world.
didn't hear him.
Well, I included them in the central and divine universe and the eternal inhabitants.
What did you call them?
Now, to go forward.
I got my
See, 10 of them on each world.
Yeah.
They're the
clarification that I needed, Berkeley,
of supremacy. 10 of them on each of the Father's world.
was that I inadvertently, a week ago Wednesday night, wrote down inventory of all personalities at close of 08.
And Dawn of First Universe.
Well, I didn't go ahead and put that down.
Now, if you'd like to go
At the
forward.
close of 08, is that inventory correct?
Yeah. You've got the Father, Son, and
What I
Paradise.
need to put down with my notes
I thought
is
that was Dawn. That's it.
and
Maybe.
Maybe a question
There's a
mark.
question mark. Now, if you want to go forward, we might explore the terminus of the First Age
yes.
before the near times of eternity. When the Infinite Spirit had personalized, it completed the existential cycle of deity personalization. And the next deity personalizations are not coordinate, but are subordinate and sub-absolute, and are the 7 Master Spirits. These deity personalizations are not existential. They are experiential. The 7 spirits of the Havona circuits are coexistent with the Master Spirits. They are not a part of the original Havona creation. They probably appeared as a response of the Master Spirit to the emerging purpose of the Supreme Being. God the Supreme is not a past eternal being. He was in existence in Havona as a spirit person before the organization of the seven superuniverses. Prior to the near times of eternity and the creation of the power directors, the force organizers had jurisdiction over the energy circuits outside of Havona. Deduction. Energy activities were taking place in the superuniverse space level long before the organization of the seven superuniverses. C. The near times of eternity and the dawn of time. Following the creation of the spirits of the circuits in Havona, the conjoint actor created the solitary messengers. They have existed since the, quote, near times of eternity, unquote. Nothing is older than they are except the circuits of Havona and Paradise. They are the first of the creations of the infinite spirit to be conscious of time, to be personalized in time and spiritualized in space. Solitary messengers appeared in the dawn of time. Deduction. The dawn of time is synonymous with the near times of eternity, because each expression is used to designate the time of the origin of solitary messengers.
Bill, do I understand? Have I lost out somewhere? You are still reading about the first universe age?
No, I'm reading about the beginning of the second universe age.
Okay.
The power directors and the power centers have existed since the near times of eternity. This is the dawn of the second age. The power directors were created by the Master Spirits, and with the Master Spirits are creators of the power centers. Probably the Supreme Executives were trinitized by the Paradise Trinity in accordance with the specifications of the Master Spirits. The last order of Paradise citizens was created at the time of the Trinity Mandate, which set forth the plan for the superuniverses. The seven spirits of the Havona circuits were discovered to be in function when the grand universe was organized. They are in liaison with the Supreme Executives and synchronized with the Supreme. The 50 reflective spirits, including Majeston, were created in the dawn of time. The Master Spirits and the Supreme Being participated in this episode. D. The beginning of superuniverse history. The first entry in recorded history on Paradise is the record of the trinitization of the Ancients of Days. Deduction. Anything prior to the creation of the Ancients of Days is prehistory and pertains to the near times of eternity, or to the dawn of time, or to the first universe age. Early in the materialization of the post-Havona creations, they were divided into 7 segments, and the headquarters worlds of each superuniverse were constructed. The Ancients of Days have ruled the super creations from near eternity. Now there, as near as I can find it, is an inventory in sequence of the transitional zone between the first and the second universe age.
Bill, you spoke of the spirit of the Supreme Being, probably existing in
The Supreme as a spirit person.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't there be others besides the Supreme?
Oh, yes.
You wouldn't include that then as in your inventory of the close of the first universe age?
No, I wouldn't. But I would put it in before the second universe age got fully underway. See, I visualize the second age, Wilma, as starting out in low gear.
Well, you named a number of things there that there is a doubt as to just exactly.
They're post-first age, but they're before the second age is fully functional. There's a twilight zone in here. You could call it the close of the first age, or you could just as well call it the dawn of the second age. You see, until you've got your 7 superuniverses organized and the Ancients of Days in charge, the second age hasn't really, we haven't gotten into the full daylight of the second age. We're in the dawning. want to talk about God's will. Can anybody think up a question? This is a rough one.
We sure can. Well, let's first talk about it on the finite level.
You think I can talk about it beyond that?
I don't want him to start talking about it on the outside level, because if he does, I won't leave.
I want to use a lot of simple little comparisons. Because we're dealing with truth here, not fact. And you can live truth, but when you talk about it, you can suggest more than you can define. To me, God's will is like a string which you give to a child in the hope that he will display creativity in the choice of the baubles that he strings on this string to make a necklace in line with his desires. It is an ordering of the baubles of human experience. God's will is not the necklace. God's will is the string, and it is for man to create this necklace out of the circumstances of life. It is an ordering and a simplifying of what otherwise would be a double handful of beads. I don't think God cares what color we choose. I don't think God cares what size of bead we choose. I think God is concerned that we make as beautiful a necklace as lies within our powers of creativity. I think God's will is a liberation of man, not a limitation of man. I think God's will is an opportunity and not a restriction on man. I don't think God is so concerned with what enters the human mouth as what comes out of the human mouth. I don't think God's will is concerned with formulas or procedures. I don't think God's will is concerned with the river banks of human thinking and institutions, as with the river that flows between these ever-changing banks. You got to have the banks, or there's no river. And I think God recognizes this. And the only thing I think he's concerned about is if the river gets dammed up. But as to where these banks are, and the oxbow lakes that get cut off and left behind, as long as the river keeps flowing, that's God's will. God's will is a living thing which provides the trunk out of which many branches can grow and which can bear many different kinds of fruit. God's will is, to me, like the living germplasm of the human race, which provides for individual expressions in individual lives, which can be uniquely different from each other. I don't think God's will is the same for each man. I think Jesus beautifully suggested this when he talked to the 12 after the crucifixion up along the shores of Galilee. He went out with the apostles, the 10 of them were there, 2 by 2, and to each pair he asked a different question. He spoke for God. when he queried these men. And I'm very intrigued that he asked different questions. Do you serve me? Do you love me? Do you trust me? Do you obey me?
And he gave each one of them a different instruction how to live the rest of their lives.
God's will is that one be a good shepherd and another be a good fisherman. God's will is a challenge to man. There's an old boy up in Chicago teaching Sunday school in a Lutheran church, and he's working away at part 4. And he's glimpsed this truth. How, I don't know. But in 2 long conversations we had, 3, he is very concerned. He said, God is challenging men, and men do not know this. God's will is that man continue to grow. As I study the universe, it seems to me that God's will puts a premium on uniqueness. And I do not see that he expresses his will in the creation of uniformity on the level of personality. Ah, yes, on the physical level, there's uniformity, but not on the personality level. The billion worlds in Havana are each uniquely different. When he expressed his will directly in an act of fiat creation, he put a premium on uniqueness, not divergence, but uniqueness, not eccentricity, but uniqueness. Let's turn it off for a minute, shall we?
Seraphim and cherubim get through flapping their wings and get the thing turned on.
Recording angels are all seraphim.
Is that it?
Right. They'll resent it if you call them cherubim.
She would?
Yeah?
She's very cherubic at times.
Is it on? What's your question, George?
Now, uniqueness and a personal destiny, as it were, may not be the right word, but a personal pattern to follow or this. Getting down to this, the Lord's Prayer says, Thy will be done. We're personalizing ourselves in that type prayer. Of course, we are praying, as I understand, not directly to God in his entirety. I mean, ultimate, or you know more about the level than I do. Which one?
Don't worry, just pray.
Yes.
They got a good post office up there.
Mostly it's through Jesus,
Yeah.
but we say, Thy will be done. And then here it says, It is my will that Thy will be done.
In one place.
Take me, for instance, then. Take Wilma, I don't care. She's nice to look.
I like Wilma's more attractive than you are, George.
Yeah.
If I have my druthers.
All right, take Wilma. Wilma wants to know.
Is this a bona fide offer?
Yeah,
I'm for it.
Sure, go ahead.
Sign a contract.
You know, 100 years from now, they'll never believe we get it this way.
Wilma wants to know. She wants to follow in her life God's will. Right now, she's doing thus and so. Maybe she should be doing thus and so. In a sense, it might be God's will that she should be moved over just a half an inch farther this way and be doing something else. Now this is a
What you're
It's a
saying,
proposition.
what you're saying, George, is what is God's will to you, to Wilma?
Yes, this is
To
a
me.
presentation of a premise that there is a will for each person. How do we find that will in our own experience? What is the means of searching, or so on?
Yes.
I'm maybe talking from way down at the bottom of the scale here. I don't know. Y'all may know how to do that. What this is all about, but
No.
Bill, I would like to say something before you start answering that question, because I brought this up myself about 2 or 3 times about the difference in the prayer, "Thy will be done," and the quotation out of the Blue Book, "It is my will that Thy will be done." To me, this is the difference. In the Lord's Prayer, which is repeated in all the churches, "Thy will be done," it indicates to me that I'll hold on to my will, Lord, but it's all right with me. You go ahead and do as your will will be done. But when you say to the Lord, "It is my will that Thy will be done," there's a difference there. I am willing. I am turning over my will. I am agreeing. I am not still holding on to my will, but you go ahead, Lord, and do what you please. I am submitting that it is my will that the Lord's will be done. I'm getting a change. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And as it's often put, not my will, but yours be done.
Yes. Not my will, but Thy will be done. I'll hold on to my will, but you go ahead and do whatever your will does. But when you say, "It is my will, Thy will be done," then you're submitting your will to whatever the Lord does.
When I use the symbol of the string and the beads, and I've never been able to think of a simpler symbol. The point I tried to make was, God is concerned with principle, not with procedure. I don't think procedures are too important. In the paper on the bestowal sons, they point out that there's hardly a vocation we can think of an honorable nature, that some paradise bestowal son hasn't made his living that way on some bestowal world. There's nothing. Jesus happened to be a carpenter because Joseph was a carpenter. This was logical. I don't think God's will relates to vocation, so long as that vocation is characterized by fairness, as we might regard the word. If that vocation is inimical to other persons, I would question that vocation. But as we use the word, generally speaking, the word vocation, doctor, lawyer, merchant, chief, I don't think God cares how we spend our days. These are the beads that happen to be in front of us. I've often wondered what I would have been 200 years ago in England. I strongly suspect an Anglican clergyman. That would come the nearest to fitting the kind of life I'm interested in. I don't think God cares that I'm not a clergyman. I don't think Jesus cared that Matthew had been a tax collector. It bothered some of the others, but I don't think it bothered Jesus. I think God is concerned with the de-animalizing of the human critter, the continuous of the growth of the human being. In my personal observation of people, I find that growth is quite involuntary up to about age 25. The last 5 years are maybe dying momentum. You're growing physically. The cortex is growing. Young animals are adventurous. They're puppyish. They're coltish. They kick up their heels and kick over the traces. And Don and Fonda were pretty well scarred up by the time they bore their first offspring. Now, in my observation, growth seems to be optional, starting at about age 25. And in my very sad observation of my fellow men, not too many take up the option. And in my very sad observation of my fellow men, not too many take up the option. A very great psychologist by the name of William Sheldon, in Psychology and the Promethean Will, speaks of this as the dying back of the forebrain. Men settle down into grooves, they think in cliches, they become increasingly parochial, provincial. They don't make this magnificent escape from time, which is the fruit of maturity, what Rodin talks about when he talks about subordinating the present pleasure for the greater lure of the grander goal. Rodin of Alexandria. The Greek philosopher, yes. Yes.
We'll talk about him later, too, please.
And it's God's will that man continue to grow. God starts man out with an impetus of growth. Ever seen a kid grow at about 13 or 14? It's just plumb involuntary. You can almost see him expand, you know. And consider the... That's right. And think of that food they shovel away. My children used to bathe in milk, you know. I remember when my milk bill got to be bigger than my rent was originally. This was quite a milestone. God's purpose in relation to man, I think, is pleasure. I'm using that word pleasure in the highest sense of the word. God is doing what he's doing because he enjoys it. I think it's the divine counselor in the first 5 papers that says you can argue all about the universe that you want, but in the last analysis it exists for the pleasure of God. It pleasures God to love. I often think of how infinitely...
It pleasures God to be loved.
Yes, that's the corollary. I often think of how infinitely lonesome the Father would be, were it not for his 2 coordinates. There are 2 beings who really understand God because they have infinite capacity, and they're the only 2. God is looking for sons. The pattern of all creation was set when the first being apart from God became his son, and when they expressed themselves in a 3rd being to complete the society of infinity. And ever since, they have been enriching the universe with a sub-infinite, sub-absolute society, starting with the 7 master spirits, if you please. God is looking for partners, sons whom he will take into partnership. The name of such a partnership is a finaliter. Otherwise, it might be described as God and Son Incorporated. It's perfectly obvious who is the senior partner. And for this reason, God invests this creature with a fragment of himself which is automatically subordinated to that creature by virtue of being less than a personality, a pre-personal entity. And there is the quid pro quo. I think each of us has to find God's will in our own Pilgrim's Progress. I do not think that God's will can be revealed by any person to any other person. Jesus could reveal the Father. But each of the 12 took from the life of Jesus what he was uniquely equipped to appropriate. And several times in Part 4, you'll recall, they take inventory of the reaction of the apostles. And except for the twins, who are pretty standard, each saw something different, even in his parables. Yes, Wilma?
But Jesus taught the will of God.
He lived the will of God.
He taught it.
Yes,
Not
but
only did he live it, but he taught it.
he never laid down procedure. He laid down principles.
He told them what the will of God was.
Yes. I can tell you what the will of God means to me. It means I should try to live this life richly. I should attempt to get from this life all that I can receive. I should attempt to give to this life all that I can give. And this is how I use the word richly. I don't think I should wrap my opportunities in the cloth and bury them in the ground of neglect.
That's the talent of the
I think I shall be held accountable for my talents someday. I've talked to lazy men with high IQs, and I've drawn an analogy from the parable of the talents. I'm going to say someday you're going to check in at some cosmic Ellis Island. You're a new immigrant. And for all I know, the immigration inspector's a guy by the name of Peter. It's quite beside the point. Maybe he is. I said, I think they're going to ask you some questions up there. And drawing an analogy from Jesus' comments about wealth, I think they're going to ask you, how smart were you? And I said, I'll tell you. I'll give you the answer. Your IQ is 145, give or take 5 points. Then they're going to ask you, what did you do with your brains? And if you wrapped them in a napkin of selfishness and buried them in the soil of indolence, I think you're going to have an awful red face up there.
wonderful illustration.
Yes, J.B.
God is not a respecter of persons.
No.
He endowed us with all the tools for our salvation in life. I think all he asks us to do is to use those tools wisely on the intellectual level of which we're operating.
Mm-hmm. And lovingly.
That's right.
Yes.
God don't give us any bigger task than we can endure.
No.
He knows our capacity.
If we break down, it's because of self-imposed.
That's right.
We might bite off more than we can chew. God never asks us to.
Well, we'll see our mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an experience.
This is good. We learn. I think God wants us to live completely, fully, ethically, morally, adventuresomely, courageously, kindly. I see in God the kindest being in the whole universe. I see in God a quality which I could best describe by coining the word unsoft. In counseling business executives, I've learned to make a sharp distinction between softness and kindness. Softness is cruelty in disguise. Kindness does not shrink from pain if pain is essential to growth. The pediatrician who looks at the infant does not hesitate when he takes a sharp needle, fills his hypodermic, and administers a vaccine to that child, and upsets that child, puts it in a tantrum perhaps, makes it ill for a day. because of this foreign substance. And God is wiser than a pediatrician. I think it's God's will that I do my own homework. But I think it's my privilege as a son to ask him for help whenever I honestly feel that the lesson is important and I can't work out the answer. But I would be ashamed to ask for help until I'd covered many pages with calculations. I think it's God's will also that I carefully refrain from being in any way critical of my fellow men who ask for help before they start their homework. Because I think God is interested in hearing from his children at all times. Criticism of prayer is very stupid criticism, because unwise praying is much better than no praying.
Of prayer.
Mm-hmm. I think God is looking for partners. I visualize the relationship, the ultimate relationship of man to God, as a partnership.
Well, a partnership has a joint responsibility to all liabilities unless it's a limited partnership.
No. You have a senior partner and a junior partner in each of these partnerships. I know who the junior partner is. It's going to be me if I make it see. But this is great. This is great. To be a volitional participant in God's plans. Not to be a friend-alike or a mechanical controller. I feel sorry for those beings, except I guess they don't know any better. But to be a creative participant in the unfolding of God's plans. Listen, if God does not need creativity, he knows how to construct friend-alikes, physical controllers, non-volitional, intelligent pieces of exquisitely perfect living machinery. He built paradise, the absolute machine. We only built one like it. He's got a plan which calls for creative partners, beings who can go out into God knows where from here and react creatively, originally, uniquely to the challenge of new situations. He couldn't send a UNIVAC out here to Nebadon to build a universe. He sent Michael, who's his partner on the creator level. We'll be in partnership with him on the creature level, but remember, creatures also are creative. We don't bring new beings into existence, save perhaps once, but we're creative in our reaction, in our responses to the challenges of situations, or we may be creative. If we have personalities, we are potentially creative. Where does new music come from? Where does a painting come from? Where does new architecture come from? But the alchemy of human thinking. A UNIVAC can be logical, but a UNIVAC will never be creative in the unpredictable sense.
In using the word creative, you are using it in an entirely different sense than some of the philosophers use the word creative when they speak of the creative mind.
I'm using it as in that sense. In other words, it is the developing of a new conclusion out of old facts, a new response to a familiar challenge, a new interpretation of an arrangement of facts.
That's what we get sometimes, and then they're not always right. But they're not always right. I would say that Bill is creating when he's postulating on outer space.
I'm more extrapolating, Wilma.
What?
Extrapolating, which is, well, it simply says that you take 1, 2, and 3 in an ascending scale, and you measure the rise, and you carry the curve on up. That's extrapolating.
Oh, I see what it is. We can engineer.
The extend the escarpment.
Yeah. I think the will of God to each man is unique, alive, refreshingly original, as personal as a tailored suit. I've looked for symbols which I can think with. And my symbols have got to be pretty simple or I can't feel them. I have symbolized this to myself, for me, as this. Try to live constructively. The term do good has been a bit abused. The expression do-gooder is one that I recoil from because it implies a busybody. You know, I should investigate JB's diet and get him on sunflower seeds or something like that, you know.
Well, they're good for you.
I'm sure they are, but he might be allergic to them. And anyway, that's a heck of an invasion of a guy's privacy. I prefer the word constructive. In life's recurring situations, as you remember, I say to myself, Willie, try to be constructive. And this can put a lot of fun into life, because in a gingerly, reasonably humble way, and my humility grows with age. I was a lot cockier about some of these things 20 years ago. I'd have given you some real answers when I was 25. See what you can do. I recall a wait between planes in Pittsburgh. As a matter of fact, I got fried completing the experiment. I was there with an associate, and there's a square bar in the Pittsburgh airport. And this was, well, the sun had crossed the yardarm, but barely. And we had about 2 hours to kill. And the bartender's relief hadn't shown up. And this fellow was on the verge of an accident. You could just tell how mad he was. He was banging bottles and so on and so forth, and gee, we sat there for quite a length of time. It's a good thing we weren't fresh from the Sahara. We'd have died of thirst in the presence of plenty. Finally, he came over and growled at him, "What do you want?" You know. Well, on a very low, let's not have an explosion. Nice dry Gibson. All right. So my sidekick says, "What do you suppose could be done with this guy?" I said, "I don't know. Let's try, just for kicks." So we got served eventually, and considerable got spilled on the counter when he banged the glasses down. And we sipped away, and it was a fair to middling Gibson, which is a lot better than a bad one. And as he came by, I motioned to him. He came over with a scowl on his face. "Why you on?" I said, "Gee," I said, "that's a real good Gibson. Thanks." "Oh." So we ordered another round. See, it took time to do this, which was our undoing. But I think one should sacrifice oneself now and then in helping one's fellow men, don't you, JB?
I sure do.
We darn near missed our plane. So we complimented him again. And he began to warm up. And then he ran out of $1 bills. and there was no one there to get him. And he really cussed up a storm. Well, I hadn't been on the road too long, and I usually carry a wad of them. And I beckoned him over, and I said, I believe I could loan you some ones. Well, you have 20, would you? I said, I believe I do. He counted them out. Well, by the time we were fading out of the picture, this guy was real happy.
And you were too.
Well, of course, that was chemical, Wilma. But now, we did this as a cold-blooded experiment in trying to get a human being out of an accident-prone state of mind. I take no spiritual credit for that experiment. It was an intellectual adventure. And it was cold-blooded just to see if it could be done. But we left that guy in a good frame of mind. He was grinning when he'd bring us our refreshments and asking us if the sarsaparilla was cold enough.
Well, you knew it could be done.
Are you sure it wasn't?
Well, it probably could be done, George, yes. The odds are you can do that if you try. Yes.
You was working the game. You
Yeah.
was playing the game.
I was playing a game. But many times I do this with great sincerity. And not with a detached feeling that I'm experimenting. See, this was an experiment, and I cite it. You got a human being who's in trouble. Can you help them? There's a guy who needs a leg up, who's deserving, and you can afford to give him that leg up. Give it to him.
Still out work in an office, it'll work in your human relationship
Mhm.
anywhere. It'll work in your home.
Work anywhere.
I read a story about a rabbi down in Houston who is so tender-hearted that if he...
What time was you all ready to go?
5:30. And it's 25:36.
When he'd take his paycheck home from the synagogue, if he'd meet a poor man, he'd give him his paycheck. Well, they all loved him. And they take up another collection and kind of bail the family out. So they've adjusted it now. They give his wife his paycheck, and she gives him pocket money. I don't think this man is wise. I don't think he's wise. Consider how complicated the will of God gets when Jesus really talked to the Roman senator about wealth. Now there he gave him detailed principles, approximating a formula. And I want to tell you something. It would take a Philadelphia lawyer and a certified public accountant to put it into effect accurately. You know what I mean? Unless you followed the one piece of advice Jesus gave. In case of doubt, the Father in heaven won't condemn you if you should err somewhat on the side of mercy. Take that example when the senator said, "What would you do with wealth?"
On the right instead of the left.
Yes. In case of doubt, remember that fundamental morality is not sex. Fundamental morality is the contest between selfishness and altruism. That's basic morality.
Thank you for saying that, Bill.
And the adjuster is concerned with the normal growth of the human ego, because a prideless man is a pitiable object. But knowing that the ego is pretty strong, the adjuster always leans just slightly on the side of altruism. This to me is what I mean by the word constructive. The word constructive in my practical life is a very big word. I think of it often. Can you be constructive in this situation? Ethics, remember, is a spider web of relationships. I tell a business executive, if you are more than fair to one man in your group, you are automatically less than fair to every other person in that group. It's not just simple, we'll keep old Joe on the payroll. Old Joe may be running a department and may be stultifying and warping everybody in that department. I mean, it's a real problem what to do with old Joe. Because old Joe is always inefficient, ineffective, and has been with the company for 25 years and is 57 years of age and has a wonderful wife and is loyal. You know? You don't fire old Joe, but it doesn't mean that you have to keep him in charge of that department and hurt those other people. You cannot follow God's will unless you have a moral foundation. Morality is not spiritual, but it is super animal. If you are moral and you live in a community and you're not a hermit, then you are beholden to ethics, to fairness, to that amalgam of justice and mercy, the hard and the warm, which we would call fairness, that adaptation of mathematical, cold, mechanical justice to the exigencies of the situation, the tempering of the wind of the shorn lamb. This is not a contravention of justice. This is an intelligent, creative adaptation of justice. If you are moral, if you are ethical, then you've got the foundation on which to essay to be spiritual. If you are sincere, and if you have courage, you have the basic equipment to go in search of God's will. If you are not sincere, you have no foundation whatsoever. If you are sincere, which means you are reasonably honest of heart. Not completely, who is?
That's quite a definition.
You're reasonably honest of heart. You are willing to correct a mistake. Then, if you have courage, you will go in motion. The papers say decision. I would substitute the word courage. A courageous man makes decisions. A sincere person could be stationary. A courageous person is voyaging. If he is sincere and if he is in motion, then I care not what his direction is, even if it is completely wrong. He has the velocity and the sincerity to correct his direction and to turn around and go in the right direction. When a woman came in off the street and washed Jesus' feet with her hair, he was talking to a lot of nice guys that were not in motion. And this gal, I don't care how long she'd sailed in the wrong direction, she was moving. And she had just done a 180-degree turn. And from God's perspective, position means nothing. It is direction of movement. Because position is a temporal fact, which has no meaning in eternity if you are moving paradiseward. God could compute only two types of beings: those who are not moving paradiseward and those who have already arrived because they're in motion. This woman had started to search for God, and from God's perspective, she'd already found him, because God does not think in time. Direction of motion is all that counts in God's viewpoint. Sure, the Pharisees, the Sadducees that were there, if any, I doubt, they may have been much more moral and much more ethical, but they were static. They weren't going anywhere.
That was the same as Jesus criticized them as much.
Yes, yes. The stupidest, most misbegotten failure on earth. If he starts for God, just who's big enough to stop him? No one. Neither powers or principalities.
Bill, I have had contact for a couple of years with a minister down here on Reno Street, was on his mission. And It constantly amazes me when I talk to him about the derelicts down there, that he's looking after those that were inside. They're hungry. Not physically, but spiritually. Many of those people are hungry.
The whole damned human race is hungry spiritually in these days.
I just think that those ministers down there that run those missions, they look after them physically too, you know. They feed them. They get them cots to sleep on. They bake clothes for them. I think they do more good than some of these great big church ministers. So those men down there need it.
If you think now, if you theologize, then I think wisdom is pretty important. From a temporal standpoint, wisdom is the pearl of great price. Wisdom is the highest value in terms of a temporal life because it includes worship. Otherwise, it's not real wisdom. It's cleverness, it's experience, knowledge. It's pre-wisdom in some form. One of my partners has a lad in college, and this junior and some of his friends were commiserating about the sad state of the world. And the kids are pretty blue, pretty much inclined to charge things off. And Floyd says, "What's wrong with them, Willie?" I said, "Floyd, they're lacking two horizon lines, temporal and religious. They do not know when they are. They have no knowledge of history. And they don't realize that times are not tough now, they just happen to be living now. Times have always been tough." I said, "You talk about atomic fallout, how about the Black Death that carried away whole populations? Whole countrysides were deserted. You talk about hard-boiled warfare, how about the religious wars? They fought over some of those German dairy farms so many times that people just got up and moved away. Square miles were deserted in Germany. Times have always been tough. Hitler was not the first one to execute populations. The Assyrians invented this little trick in moving whole peoples. We're missing several tribes in Israel that got lost somewhere in the shuffle over there because of the Assyrians." And I said the second horizon line they have no religion. They don't realize that it's not too awfully important in the light of eternity whether we live out the next 24 hours or not. If you know how tough it's been here on earth, then you can be stoical, which is a fairly high-class materialistic philosophy. And then, if you have religion, then you've got something that's much better than stoicism. When I read history, and I read a lot of it, and I think about the atom bomb, I just shrug my shoulders and I say, "C'est la vie." I mean, this is the way it's always been. We just speeded up things, that's all. When the Mongols got through with the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, it's been a desert ever since, and it was once the garden spot of the world. They wrecked the irrigation canals that had been there since the days of Sumer and Akkad and Ur. And that was only 1300 odd AD. This to me is where one can obtain intellectual peace of mind. Most of us do not know when we are or where we are. We don't know our geography. We don't know our history. I remember listening in the late 1930s in Chicago to the statement, "Who wants to die for dear old Danzig?" And I shuddered because the speaker knew not where Danzig was, what it was, why it was, and I made a mental bet that soon we would be dying for dear old Danzig, and soon we were. In the Old Testament says, "Above all things get wisdom. Seek wisdom and she will exalt you." This to me means learning where I am and when I am here on earth as a member of the human race in the perilous times of the mid-20th century. But then there have been the perilous times of Attila, the perilous times of Genghis Khan, the perilous times when Sennacherib came down on Jerusalem. There have been the perilous times when Nebuchadnezzar moved in. There have always been perilous times. I just happen to be living now, that's all. That's my conclusion. So, I look around and I don't think these times are so perilous. They're normal. And I don't have to be a blind Pollyanna to take that attitude. And then again, I have a more distant perspective. I really mean this. Whether I live a day, or a year, or decades, to me, as a personality, is not really important. I should like to do some work here. I have some ideas. I get some things I'd like to write. I have no desire to move on. But I have absolutely no concern about the lifespan that remains to me. This will be determined by circumstances largely beyond my control. I feel like a sower who went forth to sow. And quite obviously, the sower in the parable of fame was neither a geologist nor an agronomist. He didn't know much about soil, or he wouldn't have deliberately sowed seed on barren rock or on shallow ground. Obviously, this terrain was an unfamiliar terrain to him. He didn't waste his seed, albeit the seed being free, he could afford to be prodigal with it. The seed of truth is free. We don't have to husband it. And we each live our lives, I think, like that sower. We do the best job of sowing that we can do, and then recognize that the harvest will be largely determined by circumstances beyond our control. And this, to me, is a philosophic attitude toward life which has nothing to do with complacency, because one should diligently sow. But only a fool would expect the harvest to be 100-fold in all areas. Only a fool.
But you still.
Well, of course you do. Because the seed happens to be free.
There are several aspects of God that is free. Mercy.
Mm-hmm. I find in the construction of a personal philosophy of life, I find three concepts to be very practical and helpful. My philosophy, I symbolize it in my mind like a castle. Its outer works, fairly vulnerable. The outer works are founded in Epicureanism, not hedonism. Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure. Epicureanism is the intelligent enjoyment of life. I don't think my taste buds were put here to be frustrated. But if I eat too much, I get fat. I should exercise some restraint here. But I don't feel sinful about thick, juicy steaks, or about a pleasant place to sleep or air conditioning. I feel so sorry about the Hindus who worship cows instead of eating the critters. I mean, they're really missing a choice morsel here. I enjoy life. I don't frustrate my senses within the bounds of morality and ethics, and an attempt to live constructively. I think it's here to be enjoyed. I get some pretty stout walls. My walls are founded in Stoicism, because I think there's a lot of things that happen. I think I should be able to cope with these things. I mean, the good Lord didn't give me courage and fortitude to no purpose. I don't think I should go running to God every time I cut my finger, you know? And Stoicism is heroic self-respect. You do these things because you're the kind of person that does these